Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mobile Technology Spotlight, sponsored by Samsung Electronics and presented by Public Safety Insight. Samsung is committed to supporting public safety and helping first responders to use technology as a force multiplier. I'm Scott Hogue, and today I'll be talking with Lieutenant Clay Arnold of the Bloomington, Illinois Police Department. Lieutenant Arnold has served with the Bloomington Police Department for well over 20 years and is currently the Lieutenant of Administration. We also have with us Keith Redlin, the Public Sector Business Director for Samsung. In addition to supporting public safety in his Samsung capacity, Keith is also a longtime Sheriff's Reserve Deputy with the Oakland County, Michigan Sheriff's Department, and he's going to join in on the conversation today. I'm really excited about this opportunity to talk about what Bloomington's doing. Lieutenant Arnold, thank you so much for joining us today for this podcast. I wanted to just start by introducing the audience to you. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your agency and about your assignment?
Sure. First, thanks for having me. I greatly appreciate the invitation to be on the podcast. I would tell you that for those who don't know where Bloomington is, it's about middle of the state in Illinois, and we're equidistant by about 2 hours from Chicago, Indianapolis, St. Louis. Kind of everything is right there in the middle of us. We have about 80,000 residents, and we have a sister city that's landlocked with us with about another 50,000 people. So 130,000 residents between the Twin Cities. So that kind of makes us an average size. We have a 128 officer department and another 30 civilian personnel, so to speak. My job currently is I'm a lieutenant of administration. So I do a lot of things, wear many hats. That allows me to liaise with the front office. One of my top things I'm responsible for is implementing new technologies, working with grants to fund those new technologies. I also have some collateral assignments of working with the community engagement unit and parking enforcement. So a skunk works, so to speak.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. The purpose of the podcast today is to talk about technology, but more specifically about smartphone technology. What we're seeing across the country in law enforcement is a lot of agencies are transitioning to a full deployment of smartphones with their sworn officers and their employees. Could you tell us a little bit about when did your agency decide to deploy smartphones, and what was the primary reason behind that commitment within the organization?
What enabled us to actually implement a smartphone plan at our police department for all of our officers was really, we tried to do it before, but it was financially not feasible for us to add a mid-budget cycle the phones. And there was a little bit of resistance about implementation with phones. But as smartphones became more prevalent in society and in other agencies, you saw things like people using personal devices for work-related purposes, which opens it up to evidentiary exploration. And also you have FOIA requests, right? And so the need became very apparent very fast. Then it became, how do you do it? One of the biggest things for us was when T-Mobile and Sprint merged, one of their concessions to the DOJ implemented the Connecting Heroes plan, which offered free service to all first responder agencies for a time of 10 years. So for 10 years, we could get the lines of service at no cost to us, which is the biggest expense. Really buying the devices pales in comparison of the monthly expense of having every officer in your department have smartphones. So the fact that they implemented that plan allowed us to jump on board and have 10 years to figure out how we're going to fund it long term, which is an eternity. My career may be over by the time they stop offering free service stuff, which is great. At the same time, there's an intersection between everything in your life that touches technology, whether it's your personal life, whether it's your work life. And when you think of computing, the amount that you think less and less about a laptop or a desktop, and you think of a mobile device first. Those two things intersect into the point to where we are today, that it just makes sense to put that power in every officer's pocket. And as much as that's true for the average citizen, they're going to expect the officers that show up to their calls for service to be able to harness that power too, even if it's just Googling a simple fact they need to know to further a case. So it's a very logical step, and it's almost antithetical to the idea of being able to help people to not make that step forward.
One of the things that I experienced in law enforcement is a lot of times officers that have been on the job for a long period of time don't necessarily embrace new ideas, new technology. What was the experience that you had with your officers? Did you have any resistance in that area?
So early in my career, I would say that there was a lot of officers that might still write on stone tablets around the police department.
Right.
But much like we're experiencing now, we had a quick amount of turnover. So we had a lot of youth at the front end of my career. And with that is a willingness to do things differently than they've ever been done before. So I would say there's always going to be that contingent of officers. And in some places, it's far worse as far as acceptance of new change, technologies, and so on. I was fortunate in that the timing on which I came on board with the police department was probably better than most agencies as far as willingness to make that change. People like myself, who even in their personal life kind of finds technology to be interesting, I was an odd duck then. I think today that most new hires find technology super interesting. They were all born with it. They all live with it every day. I was a digital immigrant, as they say, whereas everybody we hire now is a digital native. So it's not a foreign concept, and it's a lot easier to move in the direction of new technology pretty easy.
I want to turn a little bit of time over to Keith. Keith, could you talk about from your experience globally and then also at the Oakland County Sheriff's Department, what have you noticed in this area?
Well, the first thing is that bringing in a mobile device seemed to be an awesome bridge, if you will, to bring innovation to the front line and for our deputies at Oakland County, right? We've always had the MDTs in the cars since the 90s, I guess, is when we initially adopted the MDT for basic lookup functionality. But like our captain had once said, is that bringing mobility to the front line is almost as an aggressive transition as going from pen and paper to a tablet, a digital tablet, and being able to utilize applications, companion applications that offer so much feature-rich services that it's game-changing in today's law enforcement world. But also, as we look at the new recruits and the troops that are coming into this profession, it's almost as like an expectation, right? I mean, these kids are coming out of school going, where's my phone? How am I going to work? How am I going to look at the weather? How am I going to communicate with reporting parties and follow up? So I think, just like Lieutenant Arnold had said, is that the transition and bringing this in is, I believe, a welcomed force multiplier for any agency starting to look at how do they expand innovation and giving tools to an agency that's non-resisting to the officers saying, hey, we're used to this technology.
Lieutenant, can you talk a little bit about, you've got smartphones in the hands of most all of your officers. What are they doing with those beyond the basic talk, text, and email?
Well, I would tell you the first thing that is probably one of the simplest things that you can do with a phone, but it's tremendously powerful for the job of police officer is just capturing video and pictures that are super high quality and can be demonstrated in a courtroom later. There's nothing more powerful than having an image. There's a reason why they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And I think that's probably shortchanging the power of an image. It really is over the top powerful to have a good image of crime scene, injuries, you name it, anything that an officer needs to demonstrate to a jury later. Having that image and having it in high quality is unbelievably powerful. And you look at the evolution of a smartphone, it's unbelievable in how fast they're getting better. I would put any smartphone today against any DSLR of 5 years ago. And probably the quality is going to be insurmountably better. If at worst, it's only as good as a $5,000 camera. And then you have the ability to transmit that information at the speed of the internet, anywhere it needs to go in real time. So you're able to take that picture maybe of your suspect that was captured on a CCTV system and then send it over to the officer, miles away that is out with a possible suspect to see, is this the same person? So it's unheard of as far as the quality of evidence that you can capture and the speed in which you can share it. It's just the tip of the iceberg as far as the conversation about what officers are doing today.
Yeah, and I want to turn a little bit of time to Keith to talk about this, but I was just thinking back in my career. I remember dealing with a lady who was being trafficked, and she didn't speak English and I didn't speak her language, but I was able to use the smartphone as a translation device and have a good conversation with her and figure out what was going on. Because when I got there, I didn't realize the gravity of the situation. So using that smart device to be able to translate between the two of us, I found that to be very beneficial. Keith, do you want to take just a minute and talk? What are some of the other apps, some of the other benefits that you're seeing out there with smartphone technology?
Just to add on to what Lieutenant Arnold had mentioned, I'm so glad you mentioned the fact that capturing the data and the evidence is critical and doing it in high quality. But I loved what you said, right? Being able to transmit that is the force multiplier again, because what you're doing there is, law enforcement's all about collaboration. And in the old days, not too long ago, in a BOL or a description of a vehicle or an individual, we had to use our creative minds and think about, what does this individual kind of look like? But nowadays, when you're capturing screen capture, or maybe you have a complainant's, phone, and you're able to see an image of a suspect and you're getting that out to your troops real time. I always call this like data to the edge, right? The furthest most edge of any law enforcement agency is the troops out there responding. And if they're so valuable because they're not only getting the information, but sending it back to command, a central spot, and in most cases, even sharing it with other agencies neighboring so that a community of law enforcement people respond. Now, just to address your question about what other applications are out there that we're starting to see, number one on the list has to be situational awareness. We're seeing more and more agencies are demanding, or at least putting in their policy is, hey, when you go in service, use this app, because now we can not only see the unit that you're in, the vehicle, the squad, we can see you as well as an individual on a situational awareness map. There's so many different apps out there that allow that situational awareness to be real-time and rich and to layer different information on it, whether it's drone feeds or biometrics of the individual members of the team. So situational awareness has to be number one on my list. And then companion apps, body-worn camera, evidence capture, CAD, and records management. And then the other pieces are just the native apps to the device, right? So in the Samsung world, we just launched our AI feature. So with the AI capabilities of using advanced translation, advanced lookup and search, just by taking a picture of a vehicle in a parking lot, we're able to see a lot of information about that particular object. And those are becoming just, I would say, tools, a wrench, if you will, in your toolbox. So thanks for asking me the question. I love what Lieutenant Arnold had shared about the evidence capture.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it seems like the benefits, the apps are growing almost on a weekly basis, monthly basis. You're seeing new opportunities there. Lieutenant, could you talk a little bit about how those devices are leveraging your existing applications, more specifically to like LPR, body-worn camera, or any other projects that you might have underway?
Keith's kind of already tapped into a little bit to some of the technology that we already have, especially with the evidence capture, the Axon suite of tools for video, audio, and pictures, right? And just one other point that maybe is not understood by the average person is just how efficient it is to take an evidentiary photo or video and securely upload to an evidentiary storage location from the field, not having to bring things back to the department. Keeping that officer in service as much as possible is super efficient and effective. But we're also moving away from our legacy record system, where police officers write their reports. And our current system is tethered to the Windows system, and it's currently tethered to Java in the RMS. We're moving to something more modern, where now an officer has the freedom to use or access those records in that system anywhere they have basically a browser and an internet connection. So the lifeblood of any agency is really connected to their local records, because their local records have what has been useful to them, and you can make all kinds of connections through that RMS. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Also, we use our CAD system, being able to put where officers are, not just where they park their squad car. You're able to see a location on a map, going back to what Keith was mentioning about spatial awareness, sending officers that are closest to a call to the call, so there's not an unnecessary wait time for people getting in service. Being able to check driver's licenses in our downtown bar district. We have 3 colleges in town, and to say that we have just a few fake IDs would be maybe a bit underselling it. And they've gotten super sophisticated. Having the tool that can scan those barcodes on the back of these licenses and tell us whether or not they're authentic or not has been unbelievably useful in intervening with some of the underage drinking that goes on in our downtown. We've just started implementing a virtual canvassing app where officers, after a major incident, might knock on doors and try to get people to talk to them about what they may have seen or heard or know. And to avoid duplicating that work over and over again when detectives roll out or they try to do follow-up, now that information's plotted on a map where they've had success and who they've talked to and where. And so we can do that more efficiently and get to those locations sooner than later and try to get that information while it's fresh. Really the other thing that we're trying to do is we're just trying to simply digitize most of our workflows and make them accessible on mobile devices. Something as simple as towing somebody's car used to require a piece of paper get ferried from somewhere out in the field all the way back to the station, put in front of a supervisor so they can review it and approve it. Now that can be done out in the field on a virtual form. It gets sent in virtually, saves all the time of transporting it back, and the supervisor can sign off at the station or wherever they are with a mobile device. So there's probably nothing more frustrating for a person that's had their car towed to then have to have the privilege of waiting for the tow sheet to get ferried back into the police department because the officer got called off to another high priority call on the way. They could have sent it in the first place. So, I mean, indirectly, it cuts down on complaints and frustrations that the citizens feel just because of the convenience and efficiencies that technology like using smartphones or mobile devices give them. It's, almost too much to encompass. I know that everybody in here touches law enforcement. Just never losing your Miranda card because there's a Miranda card app on your phone is one of those simple things. And unless you're somebody that's been searching for your Miranda card, you don't understand how frustrating it is to try to think, I don't want to screw this up by memory. As simple as it is, you just want to make sure that you read it precisely from your card. And so it starts that simply and moves all the way up to the most complex problems we're trying to address with technology, and specifically mobile technology.
Yeah, so true. How about a particular incident or an operation where the smartphone technology that was found to be beneficial?
Probably one of the better examples that I can tell you now is getting data pushed in real time as it's happening and being able to take action on that data. We've all got a push alert, but for those who haven't, maybe the newest generation of officers doesn't understand that push notifications weren't a thing in law enforcement before the iPhone. And so with 2007, and now we have every smartphone manufacturer, really leveraging the power of push notifications and getting that data in your hands actively versus waiting for you to passively consume it later and then decide whether or not you should act on it. So in conjunction with our ALPR network that we have in the city, a lot of people would simply assume that we use those systems to do things like pick up on people that have a suspended license or are wanted for some crime. But a lot of times what we use them for is for detecting potentially endangered people. So there might be a person who has a cognitive decline or has Alzheimer's or something like that is passing beyond one of your ALPR readers. We can set the system to proactively alert the officers if this has happened along with a photograph of what the car is, and they can act within seconds of them passing the car. If you consume that data at a later time, they could be miles away or hours away, and it's too late. So depending on how much somebody's at risk, it's really hard to say what the power of that is. Not to mention we have a lot of parental kidnappings, statewide, not locally, but just statewide and nationally as well. So it's not all about just catching people driving suspended. There's some real actionable intelligence that can come, but it needs to come in real time when officers can act on it in the moment, or it becomes far less valuable than it is.
One of the things I wanted to add to that too, and you nailed it, was the fact that these officers now are becoming more responsive versus reactive to things that are maybe within their patrol beat or their particular area of responsibility. And to be able to have passive LPRs situated to where they're strategic to serve your community, it gives those officers the ability to have better situational awareness about what's going on in and out, and to be able to be almost at two different points at the same time, and to be able to get that push alert to say, hey, I need to start heading that way before dispatch sends me there. And then using that information real time to collaborate with other officers that are either in that beat together or neighboring beats to say, hey, listen, we have something that we have to react to. And I love how the fact that you said, hey, it's not necessarily always criminal. It's just servicing those folks that may just need help, like our elders and others.
Lieutenant Hartle, I want to ask you about DEX, but before I do that, I want to see if Keith could just tell our audience about what is DEX? What are some of the benefits and what does it do?
So DEX stands for desktop experience. Here at Samsung, our handsets and our tablets have this desktop experience capability built into our hardware. And really, it's our best kept secret, right? So it allows our customers to plug that device into a hardware environment, such as a screen and a keyboard and a mouse environment, whether it's rugged or also maybe in a station. It allows you to take those applications that are developed in DEX mode to have a more real-time rich experience, touch screen, just like you would in any Windows environment, which is very native to almost any police workstation. But this allows you then to have it on your mobile device, your handheld in itself. So what we've seen is this paradigm shift where more and more application providers are starting to come to Samsung and say, hey, how do we get on this DeX train? How do we make sure our applications are rendering in this DeX format? Most notably and recently, Axon came to us and said, hey, how do we leverage the power of DeX because our customers are asking for it as well? So that's really what DeX means here at Samsung.
Thank you for that. I think it's a wonderful tool. And I want to ask Lieutenant Arnold, before, as we were getting ready for this podcast, you mentioned that you guys are sort of looking at that. Could you tell us about where you're headed as it relates to DeX?
I can tell you from personal experience, I really geeked out over DeX. So I would agree that it is one of the best kept secrets that Samsung has. In 2000, I forget what year it was, but the Galaxy S8, I think, was the first device that had it. I was blown away by it. So just kind of being the resident nerd at my department, I was aware of it early and saw the potential. So what I can tell you is when in policing, there is a determined hardware cycle where computers are on schedule to be replaced. And for the last 2 cycles, we've taken a really hard look at DeX because there is no doubt in my mind that having one device that goes with officers and becomes their computing solution everywhere is the future. That is where all the research is going. That is where all of the interest in the public's eye is going. People don't think of a desktop computer first. They don't think of it second. And they probably don't think of it third whenever they think of getting something done in a computing environment. They probably think of their mobile device. And then if they don't have their cell phone, they might grab their tablet. So their laptop and then maybe their desktop is fourth. So what I would say from our perspective is we see that this is the future of technology. It's more efficient because you don't have to have a computing platform everywhere an officer might sit down and need to type. You can just take your phone with you and it has everything that you need on it. And you can spend a lot less money in terms of having to just simply buy the accessories. And I would say that what you invest in a current smartphone is something that could be spent 3 or 4 times before you start touching what a rugged laptop costs in law enforcement, just because it has to be able to withstand the wear and tear of everyday using. And we all know that issued equipment becomes much more better taken care of than something that is a communal piece of equipment that is used by everybody. And I like to say that cops could disassemble a bowling ball. The other thing I would tell you is that maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, you started to see the gap of what a desktop computer could do for the average user show no distinction over what a mobile device could do. And then now you're starting to see companies out there put mobile chips that are designed really for phones or tablets be used as the central processing unit for laptops. So there's really no distinction between, again, I'm talking about everyday users. I'm not talking about somebody who's doing heavy graphics. There's no gap. You won't feel like the experience is second class in any way by using a mobile computer than you would by a desktop. In fact, you're probably not getting things that are optimized in an environment if you're using a desktop or a laptop, because all the apps today aren't relying on super old legacy code. And so the experience is, we've all used a phone. It's buttery smooth to switch between apps versus booting a Windows machine. It just takes forever. Launching a Windows app, it takes forever. That's not the case on mobile. So that's a long-winded way to say we believe in the future of using mobile computing first, where it runs right up to the end zone, but isn't quite over the line yet. It's just some of the vendors haven't made their app experience full-fledged when compared to the primary platforms that they offer. So, for example, our CAD partner, they have a companion app, and it's spectacular in a lot of ways, but it can't do everything that their full-fledged CAD program that runs on Windows does. It's fine to not have those things until you need them. And so there's going to be a need where we have feature parity, whether it's something that runs on a Windows machine and in an app environment on a mobile device, before we can fully commit to doing that department-wide. We're so close. I think we're like 95% of the way there, but that last 5% is important.
I think it's great. And you do want your app stack, everything to work, because you don't want the officer out in the field to need that 5% that you're missing and it not work. So, for the audience that's listening, if you think about it, you're talking a dumb terminal, basically a screen and a keyboard and a dock in the car, one in the station, and the officer uses their issued smartphone to compute both in the car and in the station. And think about the savings that's potentially there, as well as the situational awareness and everything else that goes along with them having that smartphone right there in their hands. So I'm excited to see how your implementation of that goes down the road once you get the CAD portion resolved.
And if I could just add, this isn't really necessarily something that I get great benefit out of, but IT departments they love the idea of supporting mobile devices. They seem to be far less problematic than a fleet of Windows-based machines. Our IT department says using the NVM software to manage devices, blast an image on a phone, whatever it is they need to do. And plus, it kind of has the advantage of, in most cases, it decongests the network because all of these devices have their own internet connection. So they're not having to constantly optimize internet traffic on the local network because it's not being used as much.
Earlier on, Lieutenant, you mentioned that keeping your officers in the field, right? Uptime is important, or in service is important. And one of the things I've seen with other agencies is just with over the air provisioning. Even if an officer dumps their phone, it gets ran over, crap's going to happen in the field. They can easily go back and have a phone and another tool re-imaged for them within 30 minutes. That officer is back up and running. Everything's pushed over the air. It's managed. It's CJIS compliant to the standards that we have today. And you're not taking a vehicle out of service and struggling with that. So to your point, I think that's a good point you made.
Well said. I couldn't agree more.
Lieutenant, it's our understanding that you've got a great citywide CCTV system and that you've been involved in this for, it sounds like, quite some time. Is that video accessible to the officers on their phones? And what's the plan for that? Could you talk a little bit about that program?
I would refer to the public safety camera system in our city as my personal baby. I've been working on it for 12 years, and there's not a lot of projects that take that long anywhere in policing, or that you're allowed to be in the position to work on one that long. It's been something that we worked on with a lot of passion. I've got a couple of partners at my agency. I'll call out Jack McQueen and Bill Lim specifically. I'd be in trouble if I didn't. But what I would say is that it has been unbelievably powerful as a tool to solve crime. And we pride ourselves as an agency at making tools available all the way down to the lowest level. We try to empower the newest officer with as many tools as possible, as fast as we can, because we don't believe in gatekeepers in most cases. With that said, the public safety camera is limited at this time, simply by getting streams outside of our network requires it to go through a DMZ server. And so that's a choke point for us. We are currently working on a project with a real-time crime map that is going to give that asset and a lot of other assets. And we're going to put those right in the hands of every officer because it's going to stream more directly. We won't have to go through that server, and it'll be accessible to everybody. And I could talk for days about the public safety camera system. I know we don't have time for that today, maybe for another podcast in the future.
It's exciting, and that's amazing that you've been on that project for so long. I can understand how it's really passionate. As we close this out, I just have a couple of questions, one for you and one for Keith. Any recommendations that you have, Lieutenant, for other law enforcement leaders? Anytime you're implementing technology, smartphone technology, there's things that you don't think about. And what are some thoughts that you have for other agencies that are considering doing what you've done?
I would offer just a few suggestions that come off the top of my head. The younger generation is used to being wired in to information all the time. From the time they wake up to the time they go to bed, they're jacked into information that's happening all around them. That can lead to an unhealthy relationship with what's going on at work at all times. They need to learn to shut it off. You don't want them sitting at home when they should be relaxing and engaged in personal endeavors. You don't want them thinking about how can I help out on identifying this person that's been put out an email 5 minutes ago. So that's just and plus they may run afoul of policy about working off duty. So that's a real thing when we're giving them this tool that allows them to access information at any time. They may access information at any time. And then secondly, that goes hand in hand with the fact that we're now putting sensitive data in their hands that has traditionally had the added layer of security of being limited to a physical structure. We're putting that data in their hands and it can go anywhere that officer can go. And so it can deliberately, but lead to this lowered understanding of how important that data is and the need to protect it at all times, just because of how much they're surrounded by it all the time. We're losing that extra layer of security on data that we had before. And it just needs to be ingrained in your officers that, yes, it's with you all the time, but it's more important than ever to keep that data sensitive, which leads into my next point is if you're going to roll one of these programs out, you should have a very robust policy about what you can and can't do and enforce it. And that's not to be leering or looming or sound scary for officers or anything like that. It's just they need to know what the rules are and they need to follow those rules, because we do sometimes get so used to all the things we see in law enforcement, right? They love to say it's the greatest show on earth and you got a front row seat. No truer words have been said, but there's a great responsibility with knowing all that you know and seeing all that you see. And as powerful as that tool is, that tool can get you in some trouble if you're not thinking in that way all the time. I would just say also listen to the last thing I will say just listen to your officers. They're the ones using the technology all the time. For example, the power of those push notifications can desensitize them to the importance of them. So we do a very deliberate house cleaning effort on making sure that we're not overstimulating them with information, right? So we want the power of that push notification to actually inspire them to look and act. And I'll give you an example. In any ALPR system, you have a huge checklist of things you could have it alert you for. And there's a lot of false positives. Our policy says no matter what it alerts you on, it's still required of you to verify that what that plate says is as far as the software reading it is accurate. And then secondly, dig into what it's saying could be before you take action, right? That way, any false positives are kind of caught. In the ALPR world, it'll false positive alert a lot of times on suspected suspended drivers, revoked drivers. So we turn that off for officers just so they're not constantly bombarded as they drive down the road with so many false positives that they discount what it's telling them. Now, for our traffic unit, that's a gold mine, right? They want that turned on. You have to take a granular approach to everybody's role and what they need or don't need to make sure that there's not a drowning in too much data, because that's the other edge of the sword when you have that much power in your mobile computing, is that you can desensitize everybody by drowning them. So we have an intel unit that's fantastic, again, led by Jack McLean, but he does a fantastic job of making sure that they get what they need and not more than they need, because otherwise you run that risk.
Keith, I want to turn the last minute or so over to you to give us your thoughts about Bloomington's deployment. The lieutenant's laid out a lot of wonderful things they're doing with smartphones. And then also from a global perspective, in terms of what agencies are doing around the country and what they should be thinking about if they're getting ready to deploy this technology.
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate Lieutenant Arnold and the team behind him to looking at all of this technology. I was really tuned in on the CCTV project, with the paradigm shifts that are going on right now and the hype around real-time crime centers and crime analytics. I mean, nothing speaks volumes to putting cases together than when you have real data that you guys are able to process out in the field. And when it comes to your mobile deployment, and again, another kudos to you guys for taking this. It's a journey. I've been sitting with agencies, and I won't name them, but I will tell you, larger agencies that had called us and said, you know what, we're going mobile tomorrow and we're doing this. Nobody's more excited than me and my team out there going, yes, we're taking this huge agency and they're all going mobile tomorrow. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, pump the brakes. There's a million things we got to consider. Does the app stack even work? Is our policies put in place? How are you going to manage the profiles for these officers? Does a detective get the same tools as a police officer, that a reserve, or maybe even a citation writer or like a parking enforcement individual? There's so many. The easiest decision is actually to go mobile, because once you start that journey, you start rolling down the hill and you start gaining speed, because you start realizing all these great things we've been talking about becomes reality. And the push notifications and visual evidence capture. Heck, even someone who is a citation writer or a parking enforcement person has the ability to capture evidence now. So when you give all these tools to somebody, you could almost be overwhelming. The lessons that I've learned along the way and what I preach to agencies and to leave it with your listener group is, first of all, get excited about it and find some stakeholders. Number two, have that application feasibility test done. Invite me, my crew. We'll come out and actually look at all your applications and say, hey, this works, this doesn't work. We'll help you actually do that assessment. Number three, make your vendors aware of your intentions. Just like Lieutenant Arnold had said, there's a life cycle of your software stack as well as your hardware equipment stack, and let those folks know and understand, hey, listen, we're in the journey of going mobile. And we want our next RFI or our next RFP, we want mobility and app parity to be part of that. So many times we as Samsung, we're a big agency or a big company. We talk to the big people out there, the Motorola's, the Axons of the world, and it's great to get their voice. We have a great partnership. And sometimes we hear that our customer base just isn't telling us this is where they want to go yet. So whether you're a small agency, a mid-sized agency, or a large agency, let your voice be heard. Let them know that. And then last but not least is that management and control. Lieutenant Arnold, actually, you hit on it, sir, when you said, hey, listen, have those policies in place, create governance, and hold people to it. Because again, my agency phone stays at home with me. I can log into Lean. I can have Flock services. I don't have to be sitting in a Tahoe with a computer in front of me to get apps and tools that I would natively have to use when I go in service. So there's a huge level of responsibility that comes with it. And we trust our officers with the utmost. And with this, just providing them some guidelines and some structure and governance will help. And that's really all I have to say. I really just appreciated getting to know Lieutenant Arnold more on this cast today and hearing about where you're going in technology. It's really exciting.
On behalf of Public Safety Insight, I want to thank both of you for participating in this podcast. This turned out great. I knew it would. Lieutenant Arnold, you and I have had several conversations. You guys are doing some amazing things there. And I just think it's so important that other agencies are able to look and see what you've done. And Keith, thank you so much for bringing the Samsung perspective to this. I think that was very, very helpful. So thanks to both of you.
Thank you, of course.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you again to both of you for participating. Today's episode of Mobile Technology Spotlight was sponsored by Samsung Electronics of America and presented by Public Safety Insight. Stay safe out there, everyone.